It started with a notice taped to my mailbox. The HOA president claimed part of my driveway wasn't actually mine. She said it was shared community access and that I had no right to block it, park on it, or use it the way I always had. I knew that couldn't be right. That driveway had been there long before the HOA ever existed. I'd paid for it, maintained it, paid taxes on it. But she didn't ask questions. She issued warnings. She threatened fines. And when I refused to back down, she made one mistake that ended everything. Because the moment the city surveyors showed up, the truth came out in lines that couldn't be argued with. And her authority disappeared overnight. The driveway had never been an issue before. It was there when I bought the house. It was clearly poured, clearly maintained, and clearly part of the property. I parked on it every day. Guests used it. Delivery trucks pulled into it without a second thought. Nothing about it ever felt ambiguous. The neighborhood itself was quiet. Typical suburban layout. Homes lined neatly along the street. An HOA that mostly stayed in the background, handling landscaping contracts and sending the occasional reminder about trash bins or holiday decorations. At least, that's how it used to be. Things shifted when the current HOA president took over. She was organized, aggressive, very confident in her interpretation of the rules. Suddenly, areas that had never been questioned were being reviewed. Long-standing arrangements were being reconsidered, and terms like shared access and community use started appearing in emails where they'd never appeared before. I didn't think much of it at first. Then one afternoon, she stopped me while I was pulling into my driveway. She told me I shouldn't park there anymore. She said the HOA believed part of the driveway was intended as shared access for neighboring homes. She said blocking it interfered with community use. She said I'd be receiving formal notice soon. I was stunned. I asked her where that information came from. I asked when the driveway had ever been shared. I asked why this hadn't come up years ago. She didn't answer directly. She just said the HOA was reviewing property boundaries and that residents would need to adjust accordingly. That was the first time it occurred to me that this wasn't about access or safety. It was about redefining ownership after the fact. And the more confident she sounded, the more I realized how dangerous that assumption was, especially when no one bothered to check whether it was true. At first, I assumed this would be easy to clear up. I sent her an email that same day. I attached my deed. I included the county parcel map I'd received when I bought the house. I highlighted the portion that showed the driveway clearly within my property lines. I expected a correction. What I got instead was a warning. She replied that the HOA had historically treated part of the driveway as shared access. She said long-standing usage mattered more than what individual documents showed. She said the board had agreed this area needed to remain open for the benefit of the community. There was still no evidence attached, just confidence. A week later, the formal notice arrived. It stated that I was obstructing community access and that continued use of the driveway as exclusive property would result in daily fines. The notice referenced vague sections of HOA guidelines but never cited a specific map, survey, or record. I wrote back again. I asked when this decision had been made. I asked who had voted on it. I asked why no one had contacted the city or checked official records before issuing enforcement. Her response was short. She said the HOA didn't need city approval to enforce community standards. That's when the pressure started to build. Neighbors began acting differently. One asked if I planned to open up the driveway soon. Another mentioned that the HOA president had told people the area was never meant to be private. Someone even suggested I was being selfish for taking more space than I paid for. None of them had seen a single document. They were repeating what they'd been told. The fines started appearing on my account, one per day, each one labeled shared access obstruction. Late fees were added automatically. The balance grew quickly, even though nothing about the driveway had changed. I requested a meeting with the HOA board. She declined. She said the matter had already been reviewed and that enforcement would continue until I complied. She said I could appeal after I stopped using the driveway as private property. Stop first. Question later. That was the strategy. I contacted the HOA management company directly. I sent them my documents. I asked them to explain how a driveway that predated the HOA could suddenly become shared space. They told me the decision came from the board president. No one else wanted to touch it. That's when I realized how fragile the situation really was. One person's interpretation was being treated as fact, and everyone else was falling in line without verifying it. So I went around the HOA entirely. I called the city. I explained the situation to the planning department. I told them the HOA was claiming part of my driveway was community access. I asked whether the city had any record of that designation. The response was immediate. They said no. They said if there was shared access, it would be recorded as an easement. It would be documented. It would appear on official plats. They asked if I'd like to request a formal survey. That was the moment everything shifted. I informed the HOA that I'd scheduled a city-recognized survey to establish the boundary lines once and for all. Her reply came within minutes. She warned me that placing survey markers on community land would be considered a violation. She said the HOA would not recognize the results. She said enforcement would continue regardless. I read the email twice. Then I confirmed the survey appointment. Because once those lines were marked by the city, opinions wouldn't matter anymore. And whatever she was claiming was about to be tested against something far stronger than HOA authority, reality itself. The survey crew arrived early. 2 trucks parked along the curb, bright vests visible, equipment unloaded with quiet efficiency. This wasn't an HOA review. This was official city work, documented and recorded before a single measurement was taken. The HOA president showed up almost immediately. She stood near the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, watching every move. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't ask questions. She looked like someone waiting for confirmation, not correction. The surveyors began their work methodically. Tripods were set. Coordinates were verified. Measurements were taken against city records that went back decades, long before the HOA existed. Small orange flags started appearing in the concrete and soil, one near the curb, another along the edge of the driveway, then another. Each one landed exactly where my deed said it would. The HOA president stepped forward and said the area was shared access. She said residents had used it for years. She said long-standing practice mattered. The lead surveyor didn't argue. He simply unfolded the map. He showed her the recorded plat, the easement lines, the absence of any shared access designation. He explained that if the driveway were community space, it would be clearly documented. And it wasn't. She said the HOA had authority regardless. That's when he stopped her. He said authority doesn't change recorded boundaries. He said opinions don't override city records. He said if the HOA believed otherwise, they were welcome to challenge it legally. Then he placed the final marker, right across the section she'd claimed wasn't mine. Neighbors had gathered by then. Some stood on the sidewalk. Others leaned against fences. Phones came out quietly as people realized something important was happening. The surveyor handed me the preliminary report, stamped, signed, official. He explained that the final version would be filed with the city and county, permanently establishing the boundary. The HOA president asked for a copy. He told her she could request one through proper channels. She said the HOA would continue enforcing fines. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the survey documents, her notices, and her emails to the HOA's legal counsel and the city planning department. Within hours, the fines vanished from my account. By the next morning, a message arrived from the HOA management company stating that enforcement related to the driveway had been suspended pending review. By the end of the week, another email followed. The HOA acknowledged that the driveway was not shared access and that no community rights existed over it. No apology, just reality setting in. The confidence she'd carried into that driveway disappeared the moment the city lines went into the ground. Because once the truth is measured, mapped, and recorded, there's nowhere left for authority to hide. After that, everything went quiet. The HOA didn't send another notice about the driveway. There were no revised interpretations, no follow-up warnings, no attempts to reframe what had happened. The area she'd insisted was shared access simply stopped being mentioned altogether. The survey markers stayed in place, bright, visible, and unquestionable. Neighbors who had once repeated the HOA's claims started asking different questions. A few admitted they'd never seen any documentation proving the driveway was shared. Others said they'd assumed the HOA must have checked before enforcing anything. They hadn't. The HOA eventually issued a clarification email. It stated that the driveway in question was private property and that no community access rights existed. The message was short and carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. They were backing down. Not long after, the HOA president stepped away from enforcement duties. There was no announcement and no explanation, just a noticeable change in tone. Emails became procedural instead of threatening. Decisions were routed through the management company instead of handled unilaterally. As for the driveway, nothing changed. I parked there the same way I always had. Guests used it without concern. Life returned to normal, except now there was no question about who owned what. What stayed with me wasn't the argument or the fines. It was how easily authority can be created out of assumption, and how quickly it collapses when someone asks for proof. Property lines don't shift because someone claims they should, and power doesn't last when it's built on confidence instead of facts. Sometimes all it takes to restore balance is a few lines drawn by the right authority, and the willingness to stand your ground until the truth is measured, recorded, and undeniable.